3 seconds. That is how long his hands were on her back. She counted them later, replaying the moment in her head the way you replay a sentence someone said that you were not prepared to hear. 1 second to find the catch. 1 second to ease it loose. 1 second where his knuckle grazed the bare skin between her shoulder blades, and every thought she had been organizing for the past 4 hours quietly left the room. Before we find out what those 3 seconds did to a woman who ran a $400 million company, tell me in the comments what city you are watching from tonight so I can see how far this story travels. And if you have ever been touched by someone so briefly that you should have forgotten it, and you never did, hit that subscribe button. Because this story is for you. That morning, in a walk-up apartment on the west side of Chicago, Micah Trent was ironing a shirt he did not own. He had borrowed it from his neighbor Darnell because his only dress shirt had a mustard stain on the cuff from the night Jolie decided that hot dogs required artistic expression, and tonight was the kind of event where mustard on a cuff would confirm everything the people in that room already believed about the man who fixed their building. Jolie was sitting cross-legged on the kitchen counter eating toast and watching him iron with the critical attention of a 7-year-old who had opinions about everything and the vocabulary to deliver them. "Dad, you are pressing too hard. You are going to burn it." "I am not going to burn it. You burned the last one. That was a waffle." She tilted her head, conceding the distinction but not the principle. He finished the shirt, checked his reflection in the microwave door because the bathroom mirror was too small, and found Jolie standing behind him, holding out a small velvet pincushion, faded red, bristling with pins, the kind of object that looked like it belonged in another century. "For luck," she said. He took it. He did not need to ask where it came from. The pincushion had been her mother's. Renata had been a seamstress before she was anything else, a woman who believed the world's problems could be sorted into things that needed mending and things that needed making, and she had died when Jolie was 3, leaving behind a daughter who remembered her mother's hands better than her face, and a husband who had learned enough about needles and thread and the mechanics of fabric to fix almost anything that came apart at a seam. He tucked the pincushion into his jacket pocket. It went where he went, the same pocket, every shift. Tonight was the Fontaine Media Annual Gala, and Micah was not a guest. He was the facilities coordinator for the building where the gala was being held, which meant he would spend the evening making sure the lighting worked, the elevators ran, the heating held, and the 300 people in the ballroom never once had to think about the systems keeping them comfortable. He was good at it the way he was good at most things, thoroughly and invisibly, which was both the satisfaction and the problem. He dropped Jolie at Miss Adele's, the woman 2 floors down who smelled like lavender and kept a jar of butterscotch candies on the counter that Jolie had been working through systematically since the age of 4. He kissed the top of her head. "Be good. I will be back late." "Will there be fancy people there?" "Very fancy." "Will they be nice?" He paused at the door. "That is a very interesting question, kid." Alara Fontaine had been running Fontaine Media for 9 years, and in that time she had given somewhere north of 200 speeches, keynotes, investor presentations, and boardroom addresses that required the specific kind of composure most people only achieve when nothing real is at stake. Tonight was the biggest of them. A new platform launch, $400 million in projected revenue, every major media buyer in the Midwest in the room, and a dress that her stylist had chosen because it said authority without saying armor, which in practice meant a fitted midnight blue gown with a low back and a zipper that ran from the base of her neck to the small of her spine. The zipper had been fine at 6:30. At 7:45, 5 minutes before she was due on stage, it was not. She stood in the narrow corridor behind the ballroom stage, her back to a wall, reaching over her shoulder at an angle the human arm was not designed for, trying to coax a small metal catch that had snagged on a fold of silk lining. Her assistant was somewhere in the ballroom handling a seating crisis. Her stylist had left at 7. Derek Haynes, her vice president of business development, had offered to help in a tone that made her decline faster than the zipper had jammed. The corridor was supposed to be empty. It was not. Micah came around the corner carrying a replacement bulb for the backstage work light that had blown 20 minutes earlier. He saw her, before she saw him, pressed against the wall. One arm twisted behind her at an uncomfortable angle, and he understood the problem in about half a second because he had spent his entire adult life reading the mechanics of things that were stuck. He stopped 3 feet away. "May I?" he said. She turned her head. She did not recognize him. She knew the building had a facilities coordinator because things in the building worked, but she had never connected that functioning to a specific face, the way most people do not think about the person responsible for the temperature of a room until the room is too cold. She nodded once, quickly, because the clock in her head was louder than the awkwardness. He stepped forward. He set the bulb down on a cable case. He looked at the zipper the way he looked at every mechanical problem, calmly, with his head slightly tilted, reading the geometry of the jam before he touched it. Then, he reached up with both hands, his fingers finding the catch by feel, and in 3 seconds, one to locate, one to ease, one where the knuckle of his right hand grazed the bare skin between her shoulder blades. The zipper slid home, and the dress closed, and the problem was solved. He stepped back. "You are good," he said. It was the lining. Happens with silk. She turned around. For a moment she just looked at him. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with hands that were obviously used to working, and a face that was calm in the way that only comes from years of solving problems without anyone watching. She opened her mouth to thank him. What came out instead was a question she had not planned. "How did you know how to do that?" Micah almost smiled. "My wife was a seamstress," he said. "I learned a few things." Then he picked up the bulb and walked back down the corridor. And Alara Fontaine stood there for 2 full seconds with the warmth of a stranger's knuckle still sitting between her shoulder blades, like a question she had not been asked in a very long time. She walked onto that stage and delivered the most important presentation of her career to a room full of people whose investment decisions would determine the next 5 years of her company. And she did it flawlessly, and she remembered almost none of it. What she remembered was the knuckle. The steadiness of the hand it belonged to. The way he had not fumbled or hesitated or made it into something it was not. He had fixed it the way you fix a stuck window, with competence and no performance, and then he had walked away without waiting to be thanked, which somehow made the whole thing worse, because it meant he had not done it for her attention. He had done it because something was broken and he knew how to fix it. After the speech, during the reception, she caught herself scanning the edges of the room for a man she could not name who was probably already gone. She did not find him. She found Derek instead, who materialized at her elbow with champagne and a compliment about her speech that managed to be about her dress within the first sentence. She took the glass and did not take the compliment, and excused herself to check something backstage that did not need checking. The corridor was empty. The cable case where he had set the bulb was still there. She stood in the spot where he had stood and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the specific disorientation of being interested in someone she knew nothing about, except the way his hands felt on a problem. Monday morning she found out his name by accident. A pipe burst in the 4th-floor restroom and she passed the open door on her way to a meeting and heard someone inside say, "Micah." The connector is stripped, and she stopped walking for a half-second too long, and the woman beside her asked if she was all right, and she said yes and meant no, and kept walking. Micah. The name sat in her head the way the knuckle sat between her shoulder blades, quietly, persistently, without permission. She began noticing him. Not seeking him out, just noticing. The way you notice a sound you have been hearing for years and suddenly cannot stop hearing. He was in the lobby most mornings checking the elevator log. He was on the roof some afternoons servicing the cooling units with his sleeves rolled to his elbows. He moved through the building the way weather moves through a city, constantly, essentially, and almost entirely unregistered by the people who depended on him most. She passed him in the stairwell on a Wednesday. He was carrying a toolbox. She was carrying a coffee she had bought from the wrong floor because the right floor did not require her to pass through the stairwell where he might be. They said good morning. The good morning lasted approximately 1.5 seconds and contained, in her estimation, enough unspoken subtext to fill a novel. On Thursday, she took the freight elevator for the first time in 9 years. He was inside. He looked at her with the calm attention of a man who noticed things for a living and had clearly noticed that the chief executive of a $400 million company was riding a freight elevator for no operational reason. He asked how the event had gone. She said it went well. He said he was glad. The doors opened. He held them for her. She walked out and made it 11 steps before she turned around, but the doors had already closed, and she stood in the corridor and thought, with a clarity that embarrassed her, that she was 37 years old and running an empire and had just ridden a freight elevator like a teenager hoping to bump into someone in a hallway. The following Tuesday, Derek invited her to dinner. She declined. He asked why. She said she was busy, which was technically true and practically a lie, because what she was busy doing was sitting in her office at 8:30 at night pretending to read a contract while listening for the sound of a maintenance cart on the floor below. Micah was not handling it any better. He had spent 3 years in this building maintaining a professional invisibility so thorough that most employees could not have picked him out of a lineup, and he had been fine with that, because invisibility was safe, and safe was what a man with a 7-year-old daughter needed most. He had not come to this building to be noticed. He had come to fix things and go home and make dinner and read one more chapter and fall asleep in a chair he could not afford to replace. And then he had touched her back for 3 seconds in a corridor and something that had been dormant for 4 years since Renata died, since the last time anyone had looked at him the way a woman looks at a man she is actually seeing, had woken up so fast he could not find the switch to turn it off. He noticed her too. That was the problem. He noticed that she wore the same perfume every day except Fridays, when she wore none, and he preferred Fridays. He noticed that she laughed differently when she meant it, louder and with her head tilted, and that the real laugh happened about 3 times a week, and never in the boardroom. He noticed that she took the stairs when she was stressed, the way he took them when he needed to think, and that they had nearly collided on the 9th floor landing twice now, and both times the collision had felt less accidental than either of them was willing to admit. He told Jolie nothing. But children read their parents the way meteorologists read pressure systems, detecting shifts long before the weather arrives. "Dad, you are humming," Jolie said one evening while he cooked. "I hum sometimes. You do not hum. You whistle when you are working, and you go quiet when you are thinking. You are humming. That is new." He looked at her. She looked at him with the merciless clarity of a child who had decided she knew exactly what was happening and was simply waiting for the adult to catch up. The moment that nearly ended it came on a Thursday night 3 weeks after the gala. Elara was alone in her office at 9, Jacket off, shoes under the desk, reviewing a media buy that should have had her full attention and did not. She heard a sound from the executive kitchen, the soft clatter of someone who knew the space well enough to move through it in the dark. She walked in. Micah was standing at the counter replacing a faulty outlet cover, the overhead light off because he had killed the breaker for safety, working by the glow of a small flashlight held between his teeth. He did not see her at first. She stood in the doorway for a moment and watched his hands move with the same unhurried precision she remembered from the corridor, and something about the quiet competence of it, the way he treated a broken outlet with the same care most people reserved for important things, made the distance between them feel suddenly absurd. He looked up. The flashlight dropped from his mouth into his hand. For a moment, neither of them moved. The kitchen was small and dark, and he was close enough that she could smell sawdust and soap and something underneath that she did not have a name for yet. The outlet was arcing, he said, as if explaining why he was standing 2 feet from the chief executive in a dark kitchen at 9 o'clock at night. She nodded. She did not move. Neither did he. Then his phone buzzed. Jolie's face lit the screen. He looked at it. He looked at Ilara. And she watched something close behind his eyes, not coldly, not unkindly, but with the specific discipline of a man who had decided that whatever was building between them could not be built at the expense of the life he had promised his daughter would always come first. "I should take this," he said. She stepped back. He answered the phone. "Hey, baby girl, did you brush your teeth?" His voice dropped into the warm, low register that fathers use when they are talking to the one person who matters more than anything else in the world, and Ilara stood in the dark kitchen doorway and listened to it and thought, with a sharpness that surprised her, that she had spent 9 years surrounded by men who spoke to her in their professional voices, and she had never once heard any of them sound like that. She went back to her office. She closed the contract without reading it. She drove home through empty streets and thought about sawdust and soap and a man who chose a 7-year-old's bedtime call over whatever had been building in that kitchen. She was not disappointed. She was moved, and that was worse, because disappointment she could have managed. Derek filed the complaint on a Monday, not as a complaint exactly, but as a concern, which in corporate language meant the same thing with better lighting. He framed it as a governance question. The facilities coordinator had been observed in close proximity to the chief executive in non-work contexts, including late-evening encounters in executive spaces. He suggested, with practiced reluctance, that the optics warranted review, particularly given the ongoing media buy negotiations where any reputational distraction could impact valuation. He delivered it to the head of HR with the expression of a man who wanted credit for restraint, and the HR director, a woman named Claudia Marsh, who had worked in corporate governance long enough to recognize a personal motive dressed as a professional one, accepted the document without comment and scheduled the meeting. Micah was informed on Wednesday. He sat in the same kind of windowless room he had sat in at every job he had ever held, the room where men like him were called to account for things men like Derek were never asked about, and he listened to the complaint without expression. The HR lead asked whether he had anything to say. Micah thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "I fixed a zipper, I replaced an outlet, and I rode an elevator. If any of that constitutes a boundary violation, I will accept the consequence, but I am not going to apologize for being in a building I am paid to maintain." The review recommended reassignment to a satellite facility in the suburbs. Same pay. Different building. Effective Monday. Micah read the letter that evening at his kitchen table while Jolie drew beside him, her crayons moving in confident arcs across paper that was slightly too big for the table. She looked up at him the way she always did when something was wrong, not asking, just present. The way a child is present when they have decided that being nearby is the most useful thing they can offer. He folded the letter and put it in his pocket beside the pincushion. He made dinner. He read her 2 chapters. He sat in the dark after she fell asleep and thought about what it cost a man to want something in a world that had already decided what he was allowed to have. Alara found out about the reassignment on Thursday morning, not from HR but from a facilities report that listed a replacement coordinator starting the following week. She read the name twice. Then she read the reason, which was listed as voluntary transfer, which was a lie so bureaucratic it did not even bother trying to be convincing. She walked into the HR office at 11:15 without an appointment. Claudia Marsh looked at her across the desk with the steady expression of a woman who had been expecting this visit since Wednesday. Alara did not ask what happened. She asked who filed the concern. Claudia said she could not disclose that. Alara said she was not asking Claudia. She was asking the head of a department she funded, in a building she owned, about a decision that had been made about a person She stopped. The sentence had gotten away from her, and both of them noticed. Claudia waited. A person, Alara said carefully, who has done nothing wrong. Claudia opened a folder. The concern was filed by a senior executive, she said. The recommendation was reassignment, not termination. The file is closed. Reopen it, Alara said. The conversation happened in his workshop. Not the company building, not a conference room, not any space designed for the kind of thing that needed to be said. His workshop was a rented corner of a shared garage on the south side, half the size of her office closet, with a workbench and a lathe and a row of hand tools hung on pegboard, with the precision of a man who believed the way you stored your tools said everything about the way you worked. Jolie's drawings were pinned to the wall above the bench, and a shelf near the window held 3 small wooden boxes Micah had made, for no reason other than that making things was how he thought. Alara had driven 40 minutes to get there. She had looked up his address in the employee file, which was probably another HR violation, and she had changed out of her work clothes and into something that did not look like a costume, and she had stood in front of her closet for 10 minutes trying to find an outfit that did not say Chief Executive, which turned out to be harder than running a company. She knocked on the open garage door. He was sanding the edge of a cutting board, sawdust in the air, the late afternoon light coming warm through the window the way light does in spaces that are used for real work. He looked up, and the sander stopped, and neither of them said anything for about 3 seconds. Which, she was learning, was exactly how long it took for the distance between them to become a thing she could no longer pretend was professional. "I know about the transfer," she said. He set the sander down. "I figured you would." I stopped it. He looked at her. She expected gratitude. What she got was something closer to concern. "That is going to cost you," he said. "I do not care. You should." He leaned against the bench. "Alara, I am a facilities coordinator. I fix pipes and change bulbs and make sure your elevators run on time. You are the chief executive of a company worth more than everything on this block combined. The distance between those 2 things is not a thing I made up. It is a thing the world enforces, and the world is not wrong about everything." "The world is wrong about this," she said. "Maybe," he said. "But my daughter goes to school 3 blocks from here, and the last thing she needs is a father who chased something that ended badly because he forgot where he stood." Alara felt the words land the way precise things land, clean and final. She could have argued. She could have told him the world did not get to decide what she wanted. But she heard the sentence underneath the sentence. The one that said I want this too, and the only thing stopping me is the fear of what it costs a child when her father reaches for something the world has already decided he does not deserve. She stepped further into the workshop and stopped in front of the drawings pinned to the wall. Jolie's work. A house with a garden. A tree with a face. A chair that looked almost exactly like one she had seen in a catalogue. She is talented, Ilara said. She is everything, Micah said. And it was the way he said it, not as a statement but as a geography, as the coordinates of the only place he had ever felt entirely sure of himself, that made Ilara understand what she was really asking him to risk. She turned around. She looked at him standing in the sawdust and the late light, and she said something she had not planned and could not take back. I am not asking you to choose between your daughter and me. I am asking you to believe that the world might be big enough for both. Micah was quiet a long time. Then he said, My wife used to say the world does not get bigger. People do. He pulled the small velvet pincushion from his jacket pocket and turned it over in his hands, the way a man turns over a decision he has already made but has not yet said out loud. I am not going to pretend I do not feel this, he said. But I need you to know that whatever this becomes, Jolie comes first. Not second, not equally, first. And if that is a problem for you, then I need to know now, because I will not build something that has a crack in its foundation. Ilara looked at the pincushion. She looked at the drawings on the wall. She looked at the man holding both. That is not a problem, she said. That is the reason I am here. Derek was reassigned to the regional office the following week, moved with the surgical efficiency of a woman who understood that the best response to a petty maneuver was irrelevance. The facilities transfer was reversed. Micah came back to the building on Monday in the same work shirt he always wore, and the security guard at the service entrance, a man named Earl who noticed everything and said almost nothing, looked at him and said, Glad you are back. The coffee has been terrible without you. Things did not change dramatically after that. They changed slowly, the way real things always do, in small adjustments that nobody plans and everybody notices. Micah still came in through the service entrance. He still wore the tool belt. He still fixed the pipes and the outlets and the elevator that jammed every third Tuesday. But sometimes now, when the building was quiet in the late afternoon and the light came sideways through the west windows, Ilara would appear in whatever corridor he was working in, and they would talk, not about contracts or quarterly projections, but about the kind of things people talk about when they have decided, carefully and deliberately, to let someone in. He told her about Renata, not the death, which was the part most people asked about, but the life. How she could look at a torn jacket and see every stitch it needed before she picked up the needle. How Jolie had inherited her mother's habit of studying things before touching them, and how sometimes, watching his daughter draw with that same concentration, he felt Renata so close he could almost smell linseed and thread. Ilara told him about the years after her marriage ended, not with a fight, but with a sentence delivered over breakfast. I think we have become different people. She told him about the specific loneliness of running a company where 300 people needed her to be unbreakable and nobody ever asked if she was tired. She told him these things standing in stairwells and corridors, in spaces never intended for intimacy, which made them perfect for it. Jolie met Ilara on a Friday, because Fridays were the days Micah could not find a sitter and brought her to the building. She sat in the lobby with her sketchbook and drew the atrium ceiling, which she said had good bones, and at some point Ilara walked past and stopped and asked what she was drawing, not in the way adults usually ask children questions, performing interest while already thinking about something else, but with the genuine attention of a person who wanted to know. Jolie showed her the ceiling drawing. Then she showed her 3 others. Then she looked at Ilara with the evaluating expression Micah knew too well and said, "You have nice earrings." My mom used to have earrings like that. She kept them in a blue box. Ilara crouched down so they were the same height. "Thank you," she said. "I keep mine in a blue box too." Something passed between them in that moment that had nothing to do with earrings, and Micah, watching from 20 feet away with a wrench in his hand and a tightness in his chest that he would never fully be able to explain, understood that whatever door he had been afraid to open had just been opened by a 7-year-old who had decided, with the absolute certainty of childhood, that this person was worth knowing. Months later, at the next annual gala, Micah stood in the same corridor behind the stage. In the same borrowed shirt, ironed better this time. He was not here to fix anything tonight. He was here because he had been invited, by name, on the guest list, through the front entrance. Jolie was upstairs in the children's room with her sketchbook and her mother's pincushion, because some traditions do not change just because everything around them does. She had told him before they left the apartment that his tie was crooked. It was not crooked. She just liked saying it. Ilara found him in the corridor. She was wearing a dark green dress this time, and the zipper was fine, and she looked at him with the expression of a woman who had spent a year learning that the most important things in her life had been built by people she almost never thought to look at. Then she stepped forward and straightened his collar with 2 fingers. A small adjustment, the kind that takes about 3 seconds and means absolutely nothing except when it means everything. 1 second to find the fold. 1 second to smooth it flat. 1 second where her fingertips rested on the side of his neck and neither of them breathed. "There," she said. "Now you are perfect." He looked at her. He did not smile. He did something better. He looked at her the way a man looks at a woman when he has stopped being afraid of what she might cost him and has started being grateful for what she has already given him, and the look was so steady and so certain that every question either of them had been carrying for the past year answered itself in the silence. 3 seconds, he said. She tilted her head. "What?" "The first time, in this corridor." "Your zipper." "It took 3 seconds. I have thought about those 3 seconds every single day since." Ilara laughed. The real one. The loud one. The one with her head tilted. And the sound of it filled the corridor the way warmth fills a room when someone finally turns on the light that has been waiting there all along. They walked into the ballroom together, not through the service entrance. Through the front, his hand at the small of her back, hers resting on his arm, and if anyone in that room had an opinion about the facilities coordinator walking beside the chief executive, neither of them noticed, because the distance between those 2 titles had finally, after a year of stairwells and corridors and a dark kitchen and a borrowed shirt, and a 7-year-old who saw everything, become exactly what it always should have been. Irrelevant. Upstairs, in the children's room, Jolie was drawing the atrium ceiling again. "The bones are getting better," she told the girl next to her, who nodded seriously in agreement. And in her jacket pocket, beside 2 crayons and half a granola bar, was a small velvet pincushion, faded red, that still smelled faintly of thread and linseed oil and the hands of a woman who believed that anything worth keeping was worth mending. So let me ask you something tonight. Has someone ever touched you so briefly you should have forgotten it, and you never did? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. And if this story stayed with you, you know what to do. New stories every week.